The usual scenario for a CGT event involving pre-CGT assets is that any capital gain or loss is disregarded. However, when the pre-CGT asset is interests in another entity, for example shares or interests in a trust, then in accordance with section 104-230, CGT Event K6 may apply. Where CGT Event K6 applies, it attributes a capital gain when a CGT event happens relating to pre-CGT interests in a company or trust. The key requirements for Event K6 are 1. That the taxpayer holds pre-CGT interests in a company or trust. That is, that they were acquired before the 20th of September 1985. And 2. Certain other CGT events happen in relation to the pre-CGT interests in order to trigger the CGT event. And 3. That there is no rollover for the other CGT event. And 4. That the market value of post-CGT property held by the company or trust is at least 75% of its net value. Paul Smith holds all the shares in Smith Proprietary Limited and acquired these shares on the 8th of April 1982. As these shares were acquired prior to the 20th of September 1985, they are therefore pre-CGT. Smith Proprietary Limited holds pre-CGT land with a market value of $1 million and a post-CGT warehouse with a market value of $4 million. There is no debt relating to the company, so we do not need to consider net value in this case. The post-CGT warehouse represents 80% of net assets by market value of the company. Paul decides to sell all of his shares for $5 million. As these are pre-CGT shares, then any capital gain under CGT Event A1 would be disregarded. But CGT Event K6 may be triggered and attribute a capital gain to him. The capital gain is that part of the capital proceeds that is reasonably attributable to any unrealised capital gains in the underlying post-CGT property. It is important to remember that for this event, you cannot make a capital loss. So, let's consider the possible capital proceeds attributable to Paul Smith in this example. First, we need to consider both the market value for the land, which is a pre-CGT asset, and for the market value and cost base for the warehouse, which is a post-CGT asset, and then determine the unrealised capital gain attributable to the post-CGT assets. Using Tax Ruling 2004-18, we have a two-step process to apply to work out the capital gain that may be attributed to Paul. Step 1, we work out how much of the capital proceeds actually relate to the post-CGT asset based on its proportional value of total market value. So the capital proceeds on the sale of the shares for $5 million attributable to the warehouse, which is the post-CGT asset, is $5 million multiplied by 80%, which is $4 million. Remembering that the post-CGT warehouse makes up 80% of the total market value. For step 2, we work out how much of the $4 million proceeds from step 1 relates to the unrealised gains in the post-CGT property. So we have an unrealised capital gain of $0.5 million relating to the warehouse. This $0.5 million unrealised gain is divided by the $4 million market value of the warehouse to work out the proportion to apply, which is 12.5% of total market value of the post-CGT property. We then multiply this 12.5% by the capital proceeds attributed to the post-CGT asset in step 1. So in our example, the capital gain attributed to Paul on the sale of his shares is $0.5 million. Remember that in Event K6, the company or trust is not disposing of its assets. Rather, the owner of the shares or trust interests is receiving capital proceeds from their CGT event. The underlying company or trust asset market values and cost bases are used only to work out the proportion to use in order to apportion the capital proceeds to the owner based on the pre- and post-CGT property.